Bitcoin is based on proof of work,
Right.
which means you have to mine it.
Yeah.
Ethereum, I think, is in danger with the ETFs because if it gets centralized with a custodian, then effectively they control it because it's proof of stake.
Right.
So if you have the biggest stake by default through proxy, through investors, then you control the network, and they can change the rules of the network that way, right?
But
Bitcoin,
they can't really.
with Bitcoin, you can't because you can just have it, but having it doesn't impact the network itself, like being able to transact it, the rules of the network, and mining of the asset, right? It's not connected at all.
Right.
So with proof of stake systems, the rich get richer. It's actually a direct parallel to the fiat system. If you're rich, you get richer. With Bitcoin, you don't. Having Bitcoin doesn't make you richer. Bitcoin appreciating against other things does make you richer, but that's all relative, right? But having more does not make more. So you don't have that snowball effect where the rich keep getting richer over time.
I see.
Whereas with proof of stake systems, that is exactly what you get. You get the same thing now, but with a blockchain and with, Vitalik.
There are people in this world that are so rich. They're richer than a lot of countries already, but they're just, people don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And those are people that holds a lot of Bitcoin. And at one point, they'll be so rich, they can have their own army. And it just sounds like we're going back to like where, you have your own castle, your own army, and you're richer than a country. So,
I mean, MicroStrategy is richer than many countries in Bitcoin terms too.
Yeah.
So if Bitcoin does go to 1 million or 10 million, you'll have that case where a corporation is wealthier than many countries.
And you think that's happening now?
Well, there's no way to counter that. Like, what do? Then you go into collectivism, right? Like, okay, you have too much Bitcoin. We're going to take some from you and divide it up amongst everyone else just for equity, right? But I think it's just an inevitable end state. You will always have concentration of wealth in people that had foresight.
Right.
And I don't think there's not much you can do about it.
If you're a 30-year-old that's watching this show, how much Bitcoin do you think that person should have to retire comfortably?
I don't know. I think you should not think about how much Bitcoin you should have to retire. You should find ways to create value where you can have a steady stream of income, which you can allocate to Bitcoin.
Right. Okay. So
I
let's say
if you want to get rich and just get Bitcoin and never do anything else, I don't think that will end well. It's better to have a fiat mining operation that can convert to
Bitcoin
in the next year or so, if you can, or at least half of Bitcoin. I'd say this is attainable by most people if they really hustle and they work hard. Well, the thing you have to understand is as the Bitcoin price goes up, the entire market dynamic changes. So Bitcoin at 100K is kind of like this. People are excited, but now they're bored again. People think it's a top. People are making predictions of a reasonable price target, maybe 150, maybe 200. They don't want to go too crazy out there. But when Bitcoin goes to 250, it's a very different landscape. When we get to 500,000, it's also a very different landscape too. We're halfway to overtaking gold. And at that point, people are starting to wonder, what do I sell Bitcoin for? Why am I selling Bitcoin for dollars? And then that catapults us again. So it's probably like a 2 or 3x from here, and then another 2 or 3x to get us to 1 million.
I'm sorry I said 2030. I think it was so unfathomable for me that I had to give it that extra year, but it is by 2025.
Everything's happening faster now, especially with the Trump admin talking about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And it's things like this that can really change the market dynamics in an instant, because it's just such a powerful shift, much like with the ETFs. When the ETFs launched in the US, it was sort of like a blessing worldwide that Bitcoin is a legitimate asset class now, and everyone can build products around it and financialize it. So everyone followed the US. And I think it's going to be the exact same thing with SBRs. Once the US does it, everyone's going to realize, okay, we need it too. And there'll be a fast follow and a scramble to get theirs put together.
So in terms of SBRs, you've been having conversations with governments for a while now about Bitcoin helping El Salvador, In terms of the biggest pools of institutional capital in the world, you have pensions now allocating to crypto for a while, you have endowments now allocating to crypto. Sovereign wealth was kind of like that untouchable last thing to come. Now you have El Salvador, rumors of US. Like, what does that look like in the future? Is it inevitable that we get a US Bitcoin reserve and it's just a matter of when? And then if we do, what does the world look like after that?
I think it is inevitable. The US absolutely needs a Bitcoin reserve, and I think every other country does as well. The way I see it is Bitcoin is going to be the next major economic driver. Like, people are very bullish on AI, and they think AI is going to change the entire financial landscape because of massive investment amounts into it. But all those companies that are doing things like AI, they need to store their money somewhere. Like NVIDIA needs a vehicle to store their money from selling chips and whatnot, similar to what MicroStrategy is doing, right? They're trying to protect their savings. And it's just the same thing, but on a nation-state level, where countries realize that this is the next big thing. This is a superior asset class, and they're going to need to do something. And you couple that with the astronomical debt levels and the attempts to mitigate that, like creating the Department of Government Efficiency, right? And it goes to show that people are realizing that the existing system is not sustainable. The interest payments are approaching 1 trillion or are at 1 trillion a year. And it's only going to snowball because interest compounds unless they magically fix the interest rate somehow. But everything points to Bitcoin becoming the new asset that everyone's just piling into. And I think the US doing it will trigger it everywhere else.
Have you spoken to the US government about this?
No, I haven't, but there's tons of people already working on the US. Our main focus is LATAM and other regions that are not as much in the spotlight.
What governments have you been in conversation with?
In this region?
Yeah.
We've talked to politicians in Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, and they're all very conservative. The message is really, we're waiting to see, like, we're aware of Bitcoin, but we're going to wait for the US to make a move. And I think that's a strategic blunder, because what they're looking at it from, the point of view they're looking at it from is they want to be risk averse. And they say that, we're very risk averse. But risk is sort of a circle. If you go too far in risk aversion, you go to the risky side of the circle.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to happen, because they're going to miss the boat on front-running the US.
Yeah.
Most countries don't have the fortitude to front-run the US. They're waiting for a sign. And I believe it's going to be an exact replay of the ETFs. So the US launched ETFs first. Now they're at 1.3 million or so coins.
Sure.
And Hong Kong, I think, has 3,000 or 4,000 coins. Australia was third, and they have a few hundred coins. So you can see, like, if the US goes first, the other countries are not going to be able to keep up if it plays out the same way as ETFs.
I have one question for you that I'm sure you get a lot. The original vision of Bitcoin was to be non-government backed and non-government based, and now we're in a world where we have governments regulating it, adding it to strategic government reserves. How do you square that circle with the original vision? Is this good for crypto other than number go up? Like, what does this mean for the future of the asset?
Well, governments always want what is valuable. And if Bitcoin succeeded, it was inevitable that governments will want Bitcoin because it's valuable, right? Governments didn't just wake up one day and say we wanted gold. They just wanted gold because it was valuable. It's what the people are using, and then that's what they want. So it's the same with Bitcoin. And I think the risk to Bitcoin is less than that of gold. Gold can be captured, and it's very hard to verify. There's talks of trying to audit Fort Knox now, and that's a massive undertaking, if even possible, at a massive cost. And you just don't have that problem with Bitcoin. So with gold, you don't have delivery most of the time. It's always paper. And that's what leads to this unverified pile of gold, theoretically, in Fort Knox. But with Bitcoin, you can always verify easily if you run a node. And I think that it's so easy to transport, too, that you don't come across the same problem as gold where it's captured. So even if governments buy up a large amount of Bitcoin, which I also don't think is possible, it's not going to end up like gold where it's captured. Bitcoin will still be money for the world.
Do you think in the future or near future that the richest country right now won't be the richest country?
Yeah, definitely.
And some countries that we think are not so rich will be the richest countries?
I think so, because it has to do with realizing what money is. So you're going to have the LATAM countries that just want money to come in so that they can grow, right? They're starved for investments. But there's an opportunity now to shake things up because many of the poorer countries have energy reserves. So the largest geothermal reserves, I think, is the Philippines, then Indonesia. And historically, they're kind of poor. They're relatively poor countries because you can't monetize that energy. If you have oil and you're in the Middle East, you bring it up, put it in barrels and ship it overseas to somebody.
Yeah.
But with geothermal, what do? What you can do now is simply build a Bitcoin mining facility and mine Bitcoin and then export Bitcoin to the world. So there's a big opportunity now, both in terms of realization, understanding of what money is and wanting money, and the opportunity to monetize energy. The dynamic of the world is going to shift. How much it shifts, it depends on the powers that be and the governments. But there's a real opportunity to change the entire face of the planet economically. When I was designing the Bitcoin bonds for El Salvador, I was modeling out Bitcoin price appreciation. And I decided to go with 60% annual growth because in the 5-year period before, we also had 60% median growth.
Right.
And also, if you go back like 7 years, it's also 60% median. But if you project that out forward, by 2033, Bitcoin should be at $3 million a coin. And that's conservative. So if you look at it, 60% sounds pretty small, right? But in the previous 5 years, when it is 60% median annual growth, you have some years where we did go up 10, 17x, 20x, right? You have these large spikes.
Right.
So the question is, why wouldn't we have a large spike sooner and see 1 million before, 2028 or something, right? And I think given the state of the current financial system, everything breaking, debt spiraling, interest payments spiraling, I think we'll just see it sooner. So I just think in the next trimester of that 10-year projection, so here we are now, in 10 years, 3 million, maybe that 1 million mark will happen in the first trimester.